Acclaimed writer Chris Whipple did 11 interviews over the span of about 11 months with Donald Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles. And they were all on the record, all taped. So no, none of his Vanity Fair piece has been taken out of context, as Susie Wiles has complained about. I had the chance to sit down with Chris. It's been a few days since that piece dropped, and I had some questions for him about Susie Wiles and about this administration and the impact it is having on Americans. There's very little I can say other than you're going to want to listen. Joining me now is, I would say, the man of the hour, but really Chris Whipple. You've been around for a while. You've seen it all in different administrations of different political affiliations. And I want to start right out of the gate because your New York Times bestseller, The Gatekeepers, How the White House Chiefs of Staff Defined Every Presidency, published back in 2018. Listen, you've been laying the groundwork for figuring out how the sausage gets made in each of these administrations. But this one seems to have a different tenor or tone. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're right. And of course, the stunning thing about it is that the difference between the reporting I did for the Gatekeepers and this Vanity Fair earthquake with Susie Wiles is that most of the former White House chiefs I've spoken to had been out of office for a while when I interviewed them. So they were able to be pretty candid. But for a sitting White House chief of staff to talk the way Susie Wiles did with me over 11 months and 11 in-depth interviews, it's just never happens. I mean, I don't need to tell you that, Katie. I mean, it's just senior White House officials. Having written a book on the Biden White House, I can tell you they were always on deep background, demanding quotation approval. And so this is pretty stunning. And, we can get into why I think she agreed.
I want to do that in a hot second, but I'm going to ask you a series of rapid fire questions. It's my version of cross-examination, none of which is going to be startling, but I want to actually have my viewers understand the framework for these 11 interviews, because we've obviously heard some may think thou doth protest too much retorts from the administration. So you just said 11 interviews. So it was 11 interviews, 11 separate interviews, Chris, over more or less 11 months, right?
Yeah, almost a year.
And for each of these interviews, were they taped?
Yep.
And for each of these interviews, Susie Wiles, did she ever say this is off the record?
Very rarely. So almost from the get-go, everything was on the record. And in the first phone call I had with her, she was driving from Mar-a-Lago to her place in Ponte Vedra, or Vidra, I'm not sure which, in northern Florida. And I was immediately struck by how open and uninhibited and freewheeling, unguarded she was. And she was smart and she was funny. And charming, and more than willing to talk on the record about just about everything. So it was very rare. Everything was on the record throughout this entire process, except when mutually agreed otherwise. And that was very rare for her to go off the record.
You mentioned a few minutes ago that on other iterations of interviews for pieces you did about chiefs of staff and others, that they wanted to have quotation approval, for example. Any demands made by Susie Wiles for purposes of these interviews she did with you?
Never. Everything was just simply on the, almost everything was simply on the record. Yeah.
Chris, your response then to the, again, I call it the me think thou doth protest too much from the administration now, from Susie all the way to Caroline Leavitt to others, stating that you have, quote unquote, taken what Susie said out of context, end quote.
Yeah, my advice to journalists who are just starting out to cover the White House is that whenever you hear your subject throwing words like context around, you've done your job. Because what it means is they have nothing to say. The White House has yet to challenge a single assertion in the piece, single quotation in the piece, any of the substance of a 9,500 word article in which there was plenty of context and nuance and which frankly was fair. So my response is it's like Ben Bradlee, the famous Ben Bradlee quote about non-denial denials. It's the ultimate non-denial denial.
As a trial lawyer, I totally understand the non-denial denial. Trust me, Chris. So I guess let's get then to this. This ended up being in Vanity Fair, which I think this is a publication you've worked with before. It's clearly, a big deal. And I'm sure there was some excitement or some kind of, positive energy knowing, Susie Wiles knowing, and others in the administration knowing that it was going to end up in a publication like Vanity Fair.
Well, Vanity Fair has a long history of great White House reporting, great White House scoops. It goes all the way back to my friend Harry Benson, who's now 96 years old, who went into the Reagan White House with Tina Brown in 1985 and captured Ronald Reagan and Nancy dancing in black tie. It's a rich tradition, and I think, everybody has a little bit of vanity, including this White House staff. But having said that, I got to tell you, I don't think those folks would have showed up for that group portrait in the Roosevelt Room if Susie hadn't said, be there.
Interesting. And so because of that,
Yeah.
I do want to go back to the statement you made, which was the why, because as somebody who always looks for answers, which you do as well in your pieces and in your books, why would Susie Wiles do these on the record, freewheeling in an all-encompassing way?
Yeah, I really think it's so much simpler than all the speculation that's been ricocheting around online about this. Was this some kind of plot on her part? Was she firing shots at Vance or anybody else, positioning herself? I think that my take on this is that people like to talk. At the end of the day, no matter how exalted their station or position, people want to have their story told. And I'll take Susie Wiles at her word. She told me that she was, the Trump White House had been vilified in the first term. She felt that he couldn't get a fair hearing, and she was determined to get a fair hearing for Trump 2.0, and she thought she would get it from me. The other thing that I find really interesting, I mean, one other point to make here is that Susie Wiles is in a bubble, as are all those White House staffers that you saw in that portfolio at Vanity Fair. They're all talking to themselves. It's not a bunker mentality so much as it is a bubble mentality. And when you've been in that world too long without talking to journalists, you tend to believe what you're saying, and you say stuff that to the outside world sounds crazy, except you've been in the bubble so long you don't know it. And I think that's what happened in this case with Susie. Who in his or her right mind would say that, yeah, the Letitia James thing, yeah, that's retribution, so I'm in. Words to that effect, right?
I'm laughing, but not because this is just outrageous to me because look, Chris, you've said yourself, and I'm going to use this quote, right? You've said that Donald Rumsfeld, Gerald Ford's chief of staff, said the White House chief of staff is the one person besides his wife who can look him right in the eye and say, this is not right. You simply can't go down that road, end quote. So if you have all of these people, a chief of staff and the key advisors for Donald Trump living in a bubble or this bubble mentality, and they're the people that are ostensibly advising, and I had to put that shit in quotes, Chris, because I don't really know what's going on with that. They're advising Trump. I mean, this is the leader of the free world, the person who's supposed to be, competently leading our country into greatness, and yet it's now just going down into the crapper.
That's why Donald Rumsfeld was absolutely right. He was a lousy Secretary of Defense, in my view, under W. Yes. But he was a very good chief of staff. He was real for Gerald Ford and he was quite young. But he was, when I interviewed him way back in, 2011, maybe 2010, he was really insightful about the White House, the role of the White House chief, and what he said about being able to walk into the Oval, close the door, and tell the president what he doesn't want to hear is the most important thing a White House chief of staff has to do. And readers can judge for themselves Boy, there's plenty of material to judge. Readers can decide whether Susie Wiles is doing that or not.
But it seems to me that she's not, because she tells you in these conversations she had with you, she says that her definition of difficult conversations with Trump, and she said this back to you in March of 2025, quote, they're over little things, not big.
Yeah, that
I
was
mean, there's been some big things going on, Chris, since he's taken office in January.
Really telling remark, I think.
Whoa.
And yet, what's fascinating is that on the one hand, she said that she only talks about the little stuff. And yet, on the very first day, January 20th, I asked her, did you ever go into the president and say, wait a minute, instead of doing a blanket pardon for all of the insurrectionists, shouldn't we look at these cases individually? And she said, yes. She said she'd had that argument with Donald Trump, and he had pushed back, and he insisted that no, all of these people got a raw deal. They got more than the guidelines in terms of sentencing. And so she said, and so I gave up. And frankly, she said, tie goes to the president. Well, the truth is that a lot of those insurrectionists got sentences that were more lenient than the guidelines. So that made no sense. And yet, there she was, according to Wiles, pushing back on this really critical decision and losing that argument. There are other cases which, again, I recommend that people read the piece. It's because there's this fascinating kind of journey that she takes from day one to 11 months later, where initially she seems to be trying to tap the brakes on some of Trump's excesses. And yet, by the end, I think most readers will conclude, as she said, that she's all in. You know, she's only arguing about the little stuff. That's not what a chief of staff is really paid the big bucks to do.
And you know, there was something that J.D. Vance said about Susie that I really want to kind of flesh out with you briefly. J.D. Vance says that concerning Susie Wiles' approach to the job of chief of staff, Susie takes a diametrically opposite viewpoint to those traditionally held by chiefs of staff, Chris. Yeah. Susie takes the diametrically opposite viewpoint, which is that she's a facilitator, that the American people have elected Donald Trump, and her job is to actually facilitate his vision and to make his vision come to life. That, in my humble opinion, is the quintessential definition of an enabler. And yet she makes it clear to you, Chris. She says, I'm not an enabler. I'm also not a bitch. I try to be thoughtful about what I even engage in. I guess time will tell whether I've been effective. Chris, again, I am no student of history like you are, but I find that the road to ruin for presidents has been surrounding themselves with enablers. And Susie Wiles, despite her protestations otherwise, seems to be the worst enabler in that circle.
It really just seemed to me that she wanted to have it both ways. You know, she wants to be considered, I think, well, you saw the rise that I got out of her when I quoted Leon Panetta in the Vanity Fair piece.
Yeah.
I spoke to Panetta, who was a formidable White House chief, in my opinion, along with Jim Baker for Reagan. He, as Bill Clinton's chief, was the gold standard. And Panetta told me that from where he sat, he couldn't decide whether Susie Wiles was an enabler or a disciplinarian who tried to get Trump to do the right thing. And not a very offensive comment, but when I quoted it to her, she said she really was incensed. And she said, I'm not an enabler and I'm not a bitch. So it really struck a nerve. And what I think is telling about it is I think that she wants to be in the company of the Jim Bakers and the Leon Panettas as a strong White House chief. And yet in the next breath, she will say what you said, with quoting her from the piece. But, I only fight about the little things.
Chris, for those of us that have been immersed in Florida politics for decades, we know Susie Wiles, right? We've seen her interactions with Ron DeSantis, for example, and others. She has been an ever-present force in Florida politics. And yet, I will say this, she is the quintessential fly-below-the-radar person, though. It is such an anomaly to have her in Trump world because she is not in competition for egos. traditionally, at least the way that we've seen her or perceived her. And in fact, her own deputy chief of staff said there's no room for her ego anyway, frankly, even if she tried. And yet, this almost seems like a vanity project for Susie Wiles. This is almost like, let me take my wings to soar and be able to speak with the esteemed and critically acclaimed Chris Whipple and kind of like preen a little bit, which am I wrong about that? Are my instincts
I don't know if it was a vanity project, even though it ended up in Vanity Fair. But, you know, I really think, and I don't mean to name drop here, but I bumped into Walter Isaacson the other day.
Oh, okay.
We were talking, the great biographer, and we were talking to someone else about this. And Walter said, look, you know what? There's something Chris and I know about this, which is that people like to talk. They want to tell their story. And in Susie Wiles, I have to take her at her word. I think she really believed that Trump had gotten a raw deal in his first term, terrible press, and that she thought she was talking to someone who would give her a fair shake. And I gave her a fair shake.
You did.
But the problem is, again, when you're in that bubble, you wouldn't recognize a fair treatment when you read it, because crazy is crazy when you're in that bubble.
Chris, can you and I take off our respective journalist hats and kind of practice medicine without a license a little bit for a second? You know, you did I thought, wonderful job of covering her personal history and journey, being the daughter of the famous Pat Summerall.
Yeah, fascinating.
Which I thought, you know, in and of itself was a fascinating angle. And again, this is, you know, I guess I'll just practice medicine without a license right now. But, you know, you mentioned in the piece, she's spoken about it publicly, about her father's battle with alcoholism, right?
Yeah.
And look, you know, he was famous. He was an alcoholic. And I know that he ended up finding sobriety, but to manage to live in a home and to be a part of the environment of an alcoholic requires the ability to navigate difficult personalities, narcissists, right? People that are incredibly selfish and irresponsible, even if they are battling a disease. I wonder how much of that has played into the way that she has been approaching and trying to manage somebody like Donald Trump, regardless of if he drinks.
Oh, I think it's huge. I think it tells you so much. And I think she'd be the first to say so, you know, that she has a kind of PhD in difficult men. And it began with Pat Summerall, who was an alcoholic. She had to help her mother stage interventions. Look, maybe there's something, a little bit of the serenity prayer to this. You know, that you control the things you can, but you don't try to control things you can't. And God knows she's given Donald Trump a very long leash. I mean, I think at one point I asked her, what is it, you know, what's up with the verbal abuse of women that he's been doing, particularly the Bloomberg reporter when he said, "Quiet piggy."
Yeah.
And Susie Wiles' response to that was, he's a counterpuncher. And increasingly in this society, women are punching. That was her answer.
Chris, I think all of the praise is beyond well earned. When we began this conversation, I said you are the man of the hour. Candidly, I think you are the man of the decade. These 11 interviews were startling in their candor. Listen, some of it was actually flattering, and so I agree. I think I know you gave them, all of them, Susie Wiles included, a fair shake of the leg to be able to have these conversations with you. You know, one of the things that Susie said was, I guess time will tell whether I've been effective. I think you've accelerated that timeline, Chris, quite by years, because you have now given us just some incredible insight into not only Susie Wiles, who I think for a lot of us has been a sphinx of some sort for a while, but you've also given us some insight into this administration, which has just been just jaw-dropping. So Chris Whipple, I urge everybody to not only go and read the Vanity Fair piece, there are 2 parts to it, so look for both and read both parts, but I also urge you to read Chris's books, especially The Gatekeepers, which was also made into an incredible documentary film. It was amazing. But Chris Whipple, thank you again for taking the time to hang out with me. I really appreciate it.
Great to be with you. Enjoyed it. Thanks so much, Katie.
Thanks, Chris. The Attorney General of the United States is not the Attorney General for just convicted felon Donald Trump. She's not the personal lawyer for Donald Trump, but the reality is that's all she's doing these days, because Pamela Jo Bondi hasn't figured out that her oath of office, her oath to the Constitution of the United States, her oath as a lawyer requires that she represent the people of the United States, not felon Trump. Her incompetence, her unwillingness to stray from Donald Trump in any way. I mean, he really has her on a tight leash. And I insist on that imagery for Pammy Jo with the bad hair. Because Donald Trump has his law lackeys on very, very tight leashes. And Pamela Jo was given explicit orders to only sit, stay, and bark the way that Trump wanted her to do so today before House Judiciary. You know, House Judiciary is actually supposed to have oversight over the Department of Justice. And so when asked, she has to come. Pammy Jo has to come to Congress. She has to walk herself into the Capitol, and she has to answer questions about what she's doing with that department. It may be called DOJ, but lately it's just the Department of Obstruction of Justice, isn't it? In every sense of the word. And today we saw that on full display. Let's start with Bondi's opening statements. Sitting there grinning ear to ear, thinking she's about to have a wondrously fun time. This is what Pamela Jo had to say to victims and survivors of Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and others who were physically present, sitting in the audience behind her at her hearing. Take a listen.
I am deeply sorry for what any victim has been through, especially as a result of that monster. If you have any information to share with law enforcement about anyone who has hurt you or abused you, the FBI is waiting to hear from you. I want you to know that any accusations of criminal wrongdoing will be taken seriously and investigated. The Department of Justice is committed to holding criminals accountable to the fullest extent of the law.
Sounds pretty good, right? A sincere apology, a pledge to investigate and to do more to bring justice to those victims and survivors. Well, that lasted as long and until she got questioned by Representative Jayapal, who asked her to please turn around and deliver that same apology, but looking in the eyes of those victims and survivors. And this is how that went.
You apologized to the survivors in your opening statement for what they went through at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein. Will you turn to them now and apologize for what your Department of Justice has put them through with the absolutely unacceptable release of the Epstein files and their information?
Congresswoman, you sat before Merrick Garland sat in this chair twice.
Attorney General Bondi.
No, can I finish my answer?
No.
The ghost of Merrick Garland is invoked by Pammy Jo today several times, as we heard. However, did you hear an apology? I know I didn't. And then Representative Jayapal said to the victims and survivors, please stand if you're willing and let us know how many of you have actually met with the Department of Justice about your claims. Watch.
To the survivors in the room, if you are willing, please stand. And if you are willing, please raise your hands if you have still not been able to meet with this Department of Justice. Please know for the record that every single survivor has raised their hand.
But wait, I heard Pamela Joe promising those victims and survivors that the DOJ would do everything to meet with them and investigate their claims. And yet you just saw all of them. They kept their hands up when Representative Jayapal asked, please lower your hand if you've actually met with somebody at the DOJ, despite your efforts to be able to meet with somebody at the DOJ. We're not making this up, folks. Representative Hank Johnson, in an effort to get Pam Bondi to actually do the right thing, to apologize to the victims, he asked her to turn around and do so. And this is what happened during that exchange.
Because you're not answering the question. You do a Jekyll and Hyde kind of routine around here. And I just want you to answer my questions.
What does Jekyll and Hyde mean? Can you explain that?
Well, it means you're nice to the Republicans and you turn like Hyde on Democrats. But let me ask you this, ma'am. We have the Epstein victim survivors here today. Representative Jayapal asked a simple question. If you would be so kind and honorable as to turn around and face them and apologize to them for outing them. I mean, how many lives have been derailed because your department was either sloppy and incompetent or willfully trying to intimidate and punish these ladies for coming forward?
She's obnoxious. Your time is up. That's how you respond to a sitting member of Congress when you're the Attorney General of the United States. And look, Johnson got it right. She is Jekyll and Hyde, right? Because when you followed her during this hearing, she was incredibly obsequious and kind and generous with the flattery and the answers for Republicans. Not all of them, as you'll see when Thomas Massie gets to question her. But the second that a Democrat asked her a question, rolling her eyes, flipping her hair, clucking her head like this, as if it was some huge fucking imposition on her to have to come and answer questions to House Judiciary. And what did we not get? We didn't get an apology. You know why? Because there is no kindness and there is no honor with Pamela Joe Bondi. Hank Johnson asked her to be so kind and honorable as to turn around and apologize. But she doesn't understand those words because she doesn't have any fucking integrity. But it wouldn't just stop with Hank Johnson. I told you about Tom Massie, and you're about to watch what I thought were some of the best questions set up for her to be able to answer. They were clean, and they came from a fellow Republican, right? And yet, look at how Pammy Joe responded.
Chairman, behind me I have 3 documents from the DOJ production that are emblematic of the massive failure of the DOJ to comply with the Epstein Files Transparency Act. To my right is an email that was sent by the victims' lawyers to the DOJ. It was a list of names not to redact, a list of names not to release. What did the DOJ do with this email? They released this email in the document production. Literally the worst thing you could do to the survivors, you did. And they're getting phone calls. A lot of these people didn't want to be known. And we know you touched the document because you redacted one name and you redacted the lawyer's name, but you left the survivor's name there. The next document I want to show you, that was in the title, the victims' survivors' names, all right? The title of this one is Child Sex Trafficking, Co-Conspirators, fully redacted. And by the way, I'm gonna unredact them here. Les Wexner is in this. Now your your deputy attorney general said, oh, well, he appears hundreds of times in the files, but he doesn't appear in this file until I forced you to release it, where he's listed as a co-conspirator, not to tax evasion, but to child sex trafficking, not to prostitution, not to money laundering, child sex trafficking. And then finally, what we have here is the third exhibit that I have is emblematic of the FD 302 release. These are the documents that we need that you're holding on to and over-redacting because they have the names of the men who are implicated. How do we know? Because the survivors gave testimony to the FBI, and it's in there. And what happens when you go to the portal at the DOJ to look at what's behind this redaction? Another redaction. So we can't even see them. And then there's some of these files you've pulled down from the website that we will never see because we can't search the redactions.
Tom Massey bringing the receipts. Pretty clean examples of how the DOJ under Pammy Jo has been violating the Epstein Files Transparency Act. And look, Tom Massey would know better than anybody there, right? Because he and Congressman Ro Khanna, they co-sponsored that bill. That is now a federal law. And how did she respond to those questions? She didn't. And instead, what he did was he said, look, is there any accountability here in your department for the people who fucked this up so badly that victims' names were not redacted and co-conspirators' names were? And this is how she responded.
I have several questions for you. Who's responsible? Are you able to track who in your organization made this massive failure and released the victims' names? Are you able to track who it was that obscured Les Wexner's name as a co-conspirator in an FBI document? Do you have that kind of accountability?
I believe Wexner's name was listed more than 4,000 times.
Yeah, I already told you that. This is where he's listed as a co-conspirator.
Can I finish my answer? Come on, let me finish my answer. We corrected that within 40 minutes. He was already, you're acting like everybody's trying to cover up Wexner's name.
Reclaiming my time.
I'm going to answer this question.
Reclaiming my time. Mr. Chairman.
This is how this works.
Can I have my time back? Mr. Chairman.
The gentlelady can give her answer. The time belongs to the gentleman from Kentucky.
All right, I'm reclaiming my time.
Can I give my answer?
So I'm going to put the language of the bill up on the screen.
Chairman, may I give my answer on that? It's a political joke, and I need to give my answer on that.
We'll let the Attorney General respond, and then the gentleman can move to his next question.
It's my time.
Within 40 minutes, you asked me a question. Within 40 minutes, Wexner's name was added back.
Within 40 minutes of me catching you red-handed.
There was one redaction out of over 4,700, and we invited you in. This guy has Trump derangement syndrome. He needs to get. You're a failed politician. You need to
I want you to watch the video.
Mr. Chairman, please restore his time and remind the witness of the rules here.
You all know how much I love my OneSkin products, especially my OS1 face moisturizer. Chef's kiss. And why not? I can use it and layer it seamlessly with my existing products, or I can use it to replace multiple steps in my skincare regimen. And it's a company founded by all women scientists. They have PhDs in things like stem cell biology, and those products are grounded in science and expert research. And born from over a decade of longevity research is OneSkin's OS1 peptide. It's proven to target the visible signs of aging, and it's also going to unlock your healthiest skin now and moving forward. And for a limited time, you can get 15% off by using the code FANG, P-H-A-N-G. You got to go to oneskin.co/FANG, P-H-A-N-G. You get 15% off, and you got to use the code P-H-A-N-G. Go to oneskin.co/FANG. And after you've made your purchase, they're going to ask you, where'd you come from? Make sure you show some support for our show and let them know that we sent you. Told you. Trump keeps his dogs on a tight leash, and Pamela Jo is no exception. Trump derangement syndrome, calling him a failed politician. She also had sore loser words to share with an exemplary attorney and incredible human, Jamie Raskin. She also called him like a loser lawyer as well. I mean, she really is letting all of her insecurities hang out for everybody to see. But here's the thing. The Attorney General of the United States had the audacity to laugh when she got busted redacting the name of the co-conspirator, Les Wexner. Who gives a shit if his name appears 1,000 or 40,000 times in the Epstein files when he's clearly being identified as a co-conspirator of Jeffrey Epstein? His name never should have been redacted. And yet instead of saying, I'm sorry, we made a mistake, we immediately fixed it once you brought it to our attention, she becomes defensive and she becomes even more stupid than she had been all day. But it's not just with Tom Massey, who you would think she would show some deference to, seeing how he's a Republican. She really lost her shit when Ted Lieu from California told her, I think you're a liar.
I don't believe you asked Merrick Garland these questions when he was Attorney General and set before.
I agree with you.
You twice.
I've been claiming my time. I agree with you. I agree with you. During the Biden administration, I called for people looking at Epstein files. Merrick Garland dropped the ball, as did Attorney General Bill Barr, as did Alex Acosta, a whole string of failures. But you are in charge. You have the power to change things, to hold these men accountable, and you're doing the opposite. You're protecting them. So I want to move on to another man.
Can I answer
Donald
that,
Trump.
though?
I want to move on to another
Can I answer your question about protecting
You answered
Andrew?
the question.
You're saying no. I love this.
I want to discuss another man, Donald Trump, who is all over the Epstein files, like former Prince. Here's the video. Like former Prince Andrew, Donald Trump attended various parties with Jeffrey Epstein. I want to know, were there any underage girls at that party or at any party that Trump attended with Jeffrey Epstein?
This is so ridiculous, and that they are trying to deflect from all the great things Donald Trump has done. There is no evidence that Donald Trump has committed a crime. Everyone knows that. This has been the most transparent presidency. He's the one that asked that those files
I'm reclaiming my time.
be
I got your
released.
answer. You said there's no evidence.
President Trump asked
Mr. Chairman, please stop the clock.
sign
Stop the clock.
the legislation. This is
I'd like to reclaim my
Time belongs to the gentleman from California.
Okay. I'm going to put up another document from a witness who called the FBI's National Threat Operations Center, because I believe you just lied under oath. There is ample evidence in the Epstein file.
Don't you ever accuse me of a crime.
I believe you just lied under oath, and this is all on videotape. You said there's no evidence of crime. I'm showing you. Here is.
Ted Lieu suffers no fools, and Pamela Joe certainly is one. Is she upset that she was being called a liar, or is she upset that she just got busted? Because it does take a lot to be able to sit there and look at a member of Congress while under oath and say that there is no evidence that Donald Trump has done anything wrong. The convicted felon of the United States who sits in the Oval Office, Donald Trump. But the real takeaway, I think, from that clip is the following, right? Ted Lieu says this has been a failure of the system. Merrick Garland messed it up. Bill Barr, Alex Acosta. Look, nobody is saying that there haven't been systemic failures that have just made the situation worse for the victims and survivors of Epstein, Maxwell, and others. But what I loved about what Ted had to say was this. She has to own her accountability. Pamela Joe has to own her accountability for what they've done wrong. And now this is her chance to step up and be the hero, is it not? And yet instead of embracing that role of making sure that pedophiles, child sex traffickers, child sex predators, and child sex everything abusers, rapists, let's just use that word, right? Child rapists, instead of making sure that they face justice for what they have done wrong, she instead wants to talk about Donald Trump having been the greatest president of all time. I mean, we know the ass kissing is a job requirement to work in this administration, but shit, Pam, get that brown off your nose. I was grateful that Representative Scanlon actually took time to ask Pamela Joe about a separate issue that has been weighing heavily on my mind and that I've covered here at Katie Phang News, which is NSPM 7, the National Security Presidential Memorandum 7 that I've covered, that in conjunction with a Trump executive order basically says that we're going to investigate political opposition, we're going to silence free speech, and we're going to designate people that are, quote, Antifa and people that are political opponents as domestic terrorists. I invite you to go back to my episode that I covered this, but in detail. But listen to this questioning by Representative Scanlon of Pamela Joe, because it's really important. Because again, I'm going to remind you, this woman's job is the Attorney General of the United States of America. And listen how she responds.
Will you commit to providing this committee with any list of organizations that you have recommended be designated as domestic terrorist organizations?
We will comply with the law in all matters.
Will you commit to provide this committee with your list of entities that you recommend be designated as domestic terrorist organizations?
I'm not going to commit to anything to you because you won't let me answer questions.
Okay, well then we do understand that your current position is that you have a secret list of people or groups that you are accusing of domestic terrorism, but you won't share it with Congress.
So the Department of Justice is going to keep secret lists of Americans that they think are domestic terrorists, and nobody's ever going to know. No one's ever going to get the chance to be able to either clear their name or address it. I mean, that type of secret police is very Gestapo, isn't it? I mean, I knew that Trump loves the Nazis and loves the fascists and loves Germany in the 30s. But this? Secret lists? Again, grateful that Representative Scanlon went there and covered something other than just the Epstein files. I submit to you that this is just a small sampling of how absurd this performative bullshit was today. I do struggle with the utility of these hearings. I do think it is valuable for the honest brokers in Congress, like our Democratic members of Congress, to be able to show Americans what's really going on. And yet the limit of 5 minutes only, and this talking over, grandstanding, rude, disrespectful bullshit from someone like Pamela Joe, I'm not quite sure what's the utility anymore. I don't know what the value add is to the discourse by having to watch that. Now, also in some way, though, I will say, it is good to see her with her mask off. It's good to see somebody like Pamela Joe with the bad hair, with her mask off. We know that she doesn't feel like she has to pretend to be honorable, to be professional, to have ethics. She doesn't have to pretend to have loyalty to anyone or anything other than convicted felon Donald Trump. I'm not sure why she thinks that all that is going on right now will never come back to bite her in the ass. God grant me the serenity and the confidence of a mediocre white fucking lady like Pamela Joe Bondi. Because if she thinks she's never going to have to pay the piper for her complicity, for her enabling, then she clearly didn't understand what happened to those Nazis that claimed that they were only just following orders. Be mad, be outraged, demand accountability. It's February 11th, 2026. And we are fighting this fight every single damn day. The conservatives' war on same-sex marriage, if you thought it was just done, well, you're dead wrong about that. Do you recall the Supreme Court decision, Obergefell versus Hodges? It's when the Supreme Court said that same-sex marriages are basically allowed to happen. And that was in 2015. So that's more than, 10 years ago now that we've been looking at that decision. And of course, nothing is sacred with this particular Supreme Court, and nothing is guaranteed with this particular Supreme Court. So that's why we're talking about a recent petition for writ of certiorari that was filed by Kim Davis. She was the Kentucky clerk who was jailed because she refused to issue a gay couple a marriage license. And she went to jail for, let me check here, 6 days. 6 days she went to jail in 2015. She refused to issue a marriage license to a gay couple. The grounds, she says, my religious beliefs prohibit me from doing so. Kim Davis says that her case has always been a case about religious liberty, and specifically, she's asking the United States Supreme Court to take up her appeal. Now, if you're asking yourself, wait, hold a second, hasn't she actually appealed this already? Well, you're right. She actually appealed years ago her ability to be able to deny those marriage licenses. This is back in 2019. Davis went to the United States Supreme Court and she asked to have the lawsuit that was brought against her to have it tossed out because there was a lawsuit, as we know, brought. But back then, her petition, meaning her asking of the Supreme Court to take this case, that was rejected. Both Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito back in 2019 agreed with the decision at the time not to take up her appeal. So fast forward, we are now in 2025, and since that moment in time, Kim Davis not only went to trial and was found liable for approximately $100,000 by a jury for emotional damages, but she's also on the hook for $260,000 in attorney's fees and costs. And instead of taking accountability, because for Republicans, accountability is a dirty word, instead of saying, you know what, I'm going to own up to the fact that I did something wrong, she is trying to fight having to pay those damages. She claims that the United States Constitution's First Amendment, its free exercise of a religion, immunizes her, protects her for any type of personal liability when she denied the issuance of those marriage licenses. She's asking the Supreme Court to take up her case right now. We won't know for a little while whether or not the Supreme Court will do it, but I wanted to highlight for you one of the questions that she is saying should be presented to the Supreme Court for its consideration. She offers up three, but there's one specifically I want to focus on for today's video. Quote, whether Obergefell versus Hodges from 2015 and the legal fiction of substantive due process should be overturned, end quote. She's claiming that the United States Supreme Court in 2015 and Obergefell made a mistake. She actually says they got it egregiously wrong when they said that there were marriage rights for same-sex couples under the 14th Amendment's due process protections. Her attorney, Matthew Staver, writes in her petition, the mistake, that being Obergefell, it must be corrected, he says. He then goes on to say that Justice Anthony Kennedy's majority opinion in that Supreme Court decision is, quote, legal fiction. I want to take a minute here because I want you to consider the presentation of the issues that is being made by Kim Davis at this time. Kim Davis is asking the United States Supreme Court to say that a same-sex marriage isn't real, that it doesn't have any substance, that same-sex marriage doesn't have the same legal protections as one between a man and a woman. And if you don't think that that's insulting in and of itself, not only to the rights of gay people, then you're also sending the message, if you don't believe in the legality of that Supreme Court decision, Obergefell, you're sending the message that you don't believe that gay people have value. Because essentially that's what we're doing here with Kim Davis asking for the Supreme Court to overturn is precedent. Back in 2015, when Obergefell was decided, 35 states had statutory or constitutional bans on same-sex marriages, and only 8 states had actually enacted laws that explicitly allowed the union of same-sex marriages. So far, fast forward to 2025, at least 9 states have either introduced legislation aimed at blocking new marriage licenses for LGBTQ people, or they've already passed resolutions urging the Supreme Court to reverse Obergefell at the earliest opportunity. According to ABC News here, in June of this year, just a few months ago, the Southern Baptist Convention, the nation's largest Protestant Christian denomination, overwhelmingly voted to make overturning of laws and court rulings, including Obergefell versus Hodges, that defy God's design for marriage and family, a top priority. So again, we're not surprised that there is now this move to be able to overturn this decision. But let's get into the law, because that's really important here. The reason why you see Kim Davis make this move towards the Supreme Court is multifold. One, because she's a horrible person, and that's the most important kind of takeaway from just the humanity of this. But two, here's an important point. We have seen an incredible shift under the Trump administration's, plural, having an incredibly conservative Supreme Court majority. And when you look at somebody like Clarence Thomas, who in 2022 overturned Dobbs, and in his concurrence, he wrote the following, quote, "As I've previously explained, substantive due process is an oxymoron that lacks any basis in the Constitution. The court today declines to disturb substantive due process jurisprudence generally or in the doctrine's application in other specific contexts." And then within his concurrence, Thomas brings up Griswold versus Connecticut, the right of married persons to obtain contraceptives, Lawrence versus Texas, the right to engage in private consensual sexual acts, and Obergefell versus Hodges, the right to same-sex marriage. But then he goes on to write, "For that reason, in future cases, we should reconsider all of this court's substantive due process precedents, including Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell, because any substantive due process decision is demonstrably erroneous. We have a duty to correct the error established in those precedents." Clarence Thomas has created the entry point for somebody like Kim Davis to make this petition. But as we've covered here at the Katie Phang News Channel, just because you make a petition to the United States Supreme Court doesn't mean that the United States Supreme Court is going to take up this decision or take up your case. And the reason why it's really important for us to focus on that here as well is because Kim Davis has made this attack on substantive due process every step of the way up until now, and every step of the way she's been rejected. That argument has been wholesale told to her that it's not right. And so the likelihood of the Supreme Court to take it is pretty slim, especially because the context of her appeal is her taking action as a state agent or acting in her capacity as a state agent. Remember, she was a clerk of courts. She wasn't acting in a private capacity when she denied these marriage licenses to a gay couple. So the Supreme Court's probably will not say, yes, we're going to take this up because we want to overturn same-sex marriage. I think I'm right. But with this Supreme Court, you never know. But these constant invitations that are being made, the attack on the LGBTQ communities by Trump and this administration, and now by the religious right, or not now, I guess always by the religious right, makes us hit the pause button about our lack of credulity that this could happen. Because if we thought that Roe was a huge shock, that it was overturned by Dobbs, then we haven't been paying attention. And the erosion of same-sex rights and the erosion of the rights of the LGBTQ communities, that is a huge red flag for us as Americans. Right now, there are an estimated 823,000 married same-sex couples in the United States, including 591,000 that wed after the Supreme Court's decision in Obergefell in June of 2015. And this is according to the Williams Institute at UCLA Law School. Nearly 1 in 5 of those married couples is parenting a child under the age of 18. These numbers are critically important for us, folks. And the reason why is you will now destroy, and by the way, there's a grandfathering in of couples that have already done it post Obergefell up until the point if the Supreme Court takes the decision and overturns Obergefell. But how are you dehumanizing and devaluing a same-sex couple, especially if you think about the fact that some of them at huge numbers, 1 in 5, is raising a child under the age of 18. Earlier this year, a federal appeals court panel told Kim Davis she cannot raise the First Amendment as a defense because she was held liable for her state action, her actions as a clerk of courts, which the First Amendment doesn't give you protection. Some legal scholars suggest, and this could be a possibility, that if the Supreme Court takes this case, that it does so to decide that perhaps there is religious liberty afforded to state actors, but I don't even think that works either, because that wholesale turns so many years of precedent on its head. But I always want to bring these cases and these issues to your attention because you're going to see a proliferation of them. You're going to see an uptick in these types of cases being pitched to the United States Supreme Court Because the war on woke hasn't stopped just because we now have outrageous tariffs and because we now have Trump federalizing the DC police force and putting the National Guard in DC and his threats to do it in other cities like Baltimore, Chicago, etc. And we still have the war on woke by the Republicans and by the religious right and white Christian nationalists, even though we have still no disclosure of the Epstein files. When these legal issues percolate to the top and we have so much going on, I think it's important for me to share this information with you so you understand what's at stake. I need you to share this information far and wide. Take this video and share it far and wide. Let people understand, especially Republicans that are gay, that are in same-sex marriages. If they think that the Supreme Court's going to give a carve-out for them with their political affiliation, they're dead ass wrong. This is a war on decency. It's a war on humanity that is being waged by the Republicans and the religious right. We saw it being promised in Project 2025. We see the actual organized religions and denominations like the Baptist Church saying that they are going to be going after this and making it a priority. And we know that they have the ear of people like convicted felon Donald Trump, even though he is definitely on that Epstein list, right? The list that doesn't exist. We're going to keep an eye on whether or not the United States Supreme Court takes up Kim Davis's petition for writ of certiorari. And we're going to keep you informed because this is the most powerful way for us to create a high information America, is by sharing this information and letting you understand not only what the law is, but what's at stake. And apparently, the 14th Amendment substantive due process, according to Kim Davis, is wrong, but only if you're gay. For somebody like her who wants to be a bigot and who wants to not do the decent and right thing, she thinks it's fine.